The auction. The auction block's metal surface burned cold against Ryland Nash's bare feet. Harsh lights bore down from above, illuminating him like a specimen under glass. Around him, the massive dome of the Centauri trading hub hummed with the whispers and movements of hundreds of alien species. He stood straight-backed despite the neural restraints binding his wrists. 3 years as a resistance fighter had taught him that showing weakness only invited more cruelty. The auctioneer, a spindly Vorkath with iridescent scales, droned on about his specifications. Observe this prime human specimen. Strong, intelligent, and properly subdued. Previously a troublemaker, but our behavior modification protocols have ensured compliance. Bidding starts at 50,000 credits. Rylan almost laughed at that last claim. The behavior modification had been a joke. He'd simply played along, biding his time. The resistance had taught him patience. Even now, he was gathering intelligence, studying the layout, noting security positions. Every scrap of information could help Earth's cause. A ripple of movement caught his attention. The crowd parted like water around a stone as a new figure approached. Even without the ornate robes and floating entourage, Rylan would have known her for royalty. She moved with liquid grace, her skin a deep azure that seemed to shimmer with its own inner light. 4 arms, common to her species, were adorned with intricate metallic bracers that sparkled with embedded tech. Queen Nyara of the Astrali Empire, the auctioneer announced, his voice trembling slightly. We are honored by your presence. Nyara ignored him, her solid silver eyes fixed on Rylan. She circled the auction block slowly, studying him from every angle. Rylan met her gaze steadily, refusing to look away. Something flickered in those metallic eyes. Surprise. Amusement. It was hard to read alien expressions. This one is different, she said finally. Her voice was melodic, with an undertone that reminded Rylan of crystal wind chimes. He has fire in him still. Your Majesty, I assure you we can correct that Defuyan. She silenced the auctioneer with a raised hand. No, the fire interests me. She stepped closer, head tilted. Tell me, human, do you have a name? Rylan Nash, he answered, matching her direct gaze. Though your kind usually just call me slave or creature. Gasps rippled through the crowd at his boldness. The auctioneer sputtered in horror, but Nyara's mouth curved in what might have been a smile. Honesty. How refreshing. She turned to her attendants. This one. Whatever the price. The transaction was completed in moments. As guards moved to escort him away, Nyara held up a hand. She approached Rylan again, studying him with those unblinking silver eyes. You intrigue me, Rylan Nash. I sense there is much more to you than appears on the surface. Serve me well, and you may find life in my court more interesting than you expect. Rylan didn't respond, but his mind was already working, analyzing. This was an unexpected development, but one that might prove useful. The Astrali Empire was one of the most powerful forces in the galaxy. Their queen's personal household would be a treasure trove of valuable intelligence. As they led him away, he caught one last glimpse of Nara. She was watching him with an expression he couldn't quite read. Curiosity. Anticipation. Whatever games she planned to play, Rylan knew he would have to be careful. But careful didn't mean passive. He had sworn an oath to resist, to fight for Earth's freedom however he could. The game was about to begin, and Rylan Nash intended to play it on his own terms. The journey to the Astrali Royal Transport passed in a blur of security checkpoints and processing stations. Rylan memorized every detail he could. Guard rotations, security systems, potential weaknesses. The resistance had trained him well in the art of observation. Throughout it all, he caught glimpses of Queen Nyara ahead of their group, moving with that liquid grace that seemed characteristic of her species. Her 4 arms gestured occasionally as she spoke with advisors, the movements precise and elegant. Despite himself, Rylan found her fascinating. The Astrali were one of the most mysterious of the spacefaring races, rarely seen outside their own territory. The transport itself was a work of art, sweeping lines of what looked like living metal, pulsing with subtle bioluminescence. As they boarded, Rylan noted that the interior was surprisingly warm and organic-looking, with curved walls that seemed to flow into each other. "Your quarters," announced one of the guards, ushering him into a small but comfortable cabin. "The Queen requires your presence at dinner. You will be summoned." The neural restraints deactivated with a soft click. Rylan rubbed his wrists, studying his surroundings. The room was clearly designed for comfort rather than confinement, though he had no doubt he was being monitored. A window showed the vast expanse of space outside, stars wheeling slowly past as the ship prepared for departure. Interesting indeed, he murmured to himself. This was not how slaves were typically treated, even valuable ones. Queen Nyara clearly had her own plans for him. The question was, what were they, and how could he turn them to his advantage? For now, he would wait and watch. The first rule of resistance was patience. His chance would come. It always did. The stars streaked into lines of light as the transport jumped to FTL, carrying them toward whatever fate awaited in the heart of the Astrali Empire. Palace intrigues. The Astrali Royal Palace defied everything Rylan thought he knew about alien architecture. Instead of the harsh angles and metallic surfaces common to most species buildings, the palace seemed almost alive. Crystalline spires grew from the ground like giant flowers, their surfaces shifting with patterns of light that pulsed in time with some hidden rhythm. 3 weeks had passed since his arrival, and Rylan was still adjusting to his unusual position. Queen Nyara had installed him as her personal attendant, a role that gave him unprecedented access to the heart of Astralu power. He served at her private meals, attended court sessions, and even accompanied her to council meetings. The other courtiers regarded him with a mixture of curiosity and disdain. "The human arrives promptly, as always," drawled Lord Vaxon, one of Nyara's senior advisors. The Astrali noble's 4 arms were wrapped in ceremonial bands that marked his high rank. One might almost forget he's a slave. Rylan ignored the barb as he arranged the morning meal on Nyara's private terrace. The view stretched for miles across the capital city, its bioorganic architecture glowing in the light of the binary suns. He had learned that showing reaction to the noble's taunts only encouraged them. Lord Vaxon, Nyara's melodic voice carried a note of warning as she emerged onto the terrace. "I trust you bring the reports I requested, not merely commentary on my staff." The noble bowed deeply, his azure skin flushing a darker blue. "Of course, Your Majesty, though I must again express concern about discussing sensitive matters in front of. My choices are not yours to question." Nyara settled gracefully into her seat, gesturing for Rylan to pour her morning tea. The reports. As Vaxon began his update on colonial affairs, Rylan maintained his careful facade of servile attention while his mind worked furiously. The tensions in the outer colonies were growing worse. Food shortages, labor disputes, accusations of corruption among local governors. He filed away every detail, building a picture of the Empire's weaknesses. But more interesting was what Vaxon wasn't saying. The way his upper hands twitched when discussing certain colonies. The careful omissions in his report. Rylan had learned to read Astrali body language, and the advisor was definitely hiding something. "Leave us," Nyara commanded when the report was finished. Vaxon hesitated, then bowed and departed. As soon as he was gone, Nyara's formal posture relaxed slightly. "You have thoughts, Rylan Nash." He had grown used to these private conversations. The Queen seemed to value his outsider's perspective, though he was never quite sure how much to reveal. "Lord Vaxon is lying about the situation on Nexus Prime. The unrest there is worse than he claims." "Indeed." She sipped her tea, silver eyes studying him over the rim. "And how would a human slave come to such a conclusion?" "The same way I noticed that he's been meeting secretly with other council members after hours. The same way I see the encrypted communications being passed between certain nobles." Rylan met her gaze steadily. "I observe. It's what kept me alive as a resistance fighter. and it's what makes me useful to you now." Naira set down her cup with deliberate care. "You speak boldly for one in your position. You didn't buy me for my meek subservience." "No," she agreed, and there was that hint of a smile again. "I did not." She rose and moved to the terrace railing, gazing out at her city. "Tell me, Rylan Nash, if you were in my position, what would you do about these observations of yours?" It was a test, he knew. Every conversation with her was in some way, but he had begun to understand her better over these weeks. She was not like the other alien rulers he had encountered, proud, dismissive, cruel. There was a sharp intelligence behind those silver eyes, and a genuine desire to understand. "I would look deeper into the connection between the colonial unrest and the noble houses," he said carefully. "Vaxen and his allies have holdings on many of the troubled worlds. They stand to benefit if the current governors are removed. A conspiracy among my own council." Her tone was thoughtful, rather than angry. "It would not be the first time such a thing has been attempted." "The Australi Empire is vast," Rylan noted. "It must be difficult to hold together so many worlds, so many competing interests. Hence the value of having someone who sees things differently." She turned back to him, head tilted. "Someone not bound by our traditions and assumptions. Someone who has fought against empires, and thus understands their weaknesses." The implications of her words hung in the air between them. Ryland felt a familiar tension in his chest, the conflict between his duty to the resistance and his growing fascination with this alien queen who was so different from what he had expected. "I serve at your Majesty's pleasure," he said finally, the formal words carrying layers of meaning. "Do you?" Nyara stepped closer, her movement liquid grace. "I sometimes wonder, Rylan Nash, who you truly serve. Your actions aid my interests, yet I sense there is much you hold back. Many thoughts you keep hidden behind those intriguing human eyes." She was very close now. Rylan could see the subtle patterns that shifted beneath her azure skin, like stars wheeling in an alien sky. Her scent reminded him of ozone and strange flowers. "Perhaps," he said softly, "I am still discovering the answer to that myself." The moment stretched between them, charged with unspoken possibilities. Then Nyara stepped back, resuming her more formal bearing. "We shall see. For now, I have a task for you, one that requires your unique talents for observation." As she outlined her plans, Rylan listened with growing interest. It seemed his role in the Australi court was about to become even more complicated, and somewhere in the back of his mind, a small voice wondered if he was starting to forget where his true loyalties should lie. Seeds of revolution. The news arrived during the third sunset, when the smallest of the system's binary stars was dipping below the horizon. Rylan was arranging documents in Nyara's private study when the emergency transmission cut through all palace communications. "Your Majesty," the holographic figure flickered with interference. "Nexus Prime is in open revolt. The governor's palace has fallen. They're calling for independence from the Empire." Rylan watched Nyara absorb the news, noting how her lower hands clenched while her upper ones remained perfectly still, a sign of deep disturbance in Australi body language. "Casualties?" she asked, her voice maintaining its usual melodic calm. "Unknown, but the governor and most of his staff are confirmed dead. The rebels are well organized, well armed. They're calling themselves the Children of Dawn." After dismissing the messenger, Nyara stood in silence, staring out at her capital city. The bioluminescent spires were beginning to glow as darkness fell, creating rivers of light that flowed through the metropolis. "You don't seem surprised," she said finally, not turning around. "The signs were there," Rylan replied carefully. "The food shortages, the corruption, the growing resentment. People can only be pushed so far before they break. Like your people broke." Now she did turn, fixing him with those silver eyes. "Is that why you understand this so well, Rylan Nash? Because you've been part of such an uprising before." He met her gaze steadily. "Yes, though our methods were different. We couldn't match the Vorkath in open combat, so we fought from the shadows." hit-and-run attacks, sabotage, intelligence gathering. And now you serve in the court of another empire. Her tone was thoughtful rather than accusatory. Does it not strike you as ironic? Everything about my position here is ironic, Your Majesty. He allowed himself a small smile. A human slave advising an alien queen on how to maintain her power over subjugated worlds. The resistance would have my head. Would they? She moved closer, her motion liquid grace as always. Or would they commend you for placing yourself in such a valuable position? For gaining the trust of an enemy ruler? The question hung in the air between them, heavy with implication. Ryland felt his pulse quicken. Are we enemies, then? I sometimes wonder. Nyara's upper right hand rose, almost touching his face before dropping away. You've been here nearly 3 months now, Ryland Nash. You've seen how my empire works. How I rule. Are we the monsters your resistance painted us as? No, he admitted softly. You're not what I expected. This place, your people, it's more complex than we knew. And yet the complexity doesn't make it right, does it? The subjugation of worlds, no matter how benevolent the rule. Her smile held a touch of sadness. I see it in your eyes sometimes, when reports come in from the colonies. You understand their desire for freedom because you feel it yourself. Before Ryland could respond, another emergency transmission cut through the air. More colonies had risen up, joining the rebellion. The Children of Dawn were spreading their message across the empire. Freedom from astrally rule. Self-determination for all worlds. Nyara absorbed the reports with outward calm, but Ryland could see the tension in her frame. When they were alone again, she turned to him with an intensity he hadn't seen before. Help me understand them, she commanded. You've been on both sides of this equation now. Help me see what I'm missing. Why my people are turning against everything we've built. Are you sure you want that answer? Ryland asked quietly. It may not be what you wish to hear. What I wish is irrelevant. What I need is the truth, even if it burns. And so, as the night deepened around them, Ryland told her. He spoke of the human resistance, of watching alien ships darken Earth's skies. He described the fear and rage of seeing one's world occupied, one's culture subordinated to another's will. But he also spoke of what he'd learned in her court, the genuine desire of many Astrali to improve the lives of their subject worlds, the benefits of their advanced technology and protection. The problem, he concluded, is that good intentions don't change the fundamental truth. No one wants to be ruled by others, no matter how benevolent those rulers might be. Nyara was silent for a long time after he finished. The bioluminescent patterns beneath her skin had slowed to a gentle pulse, which he'd learned was a sign of deep thought. My ancestors built this empire to unite the stars, she said finally, to bring order and progress to a chaotic galaxy. Were they wrong to try? Wrong and right aren't always useful terms when dealing with history, Ryland replied. But maybe it's time to consider a new way, one that preserves the benefits of unity without requiring submission. She turned to him then, and something in her expression made his breath catch. Always you surprise me, Ryland Nash. When I bought you at that auction, I thought to gain an interesting diversion. Instead, I find myself relying on your counsel more with each passing day. Perhaps that's because I have nothing to lose by speaking truth to you, he suggested. Everyone else in your court is bound by tradition, protocol, and fear. And you. Her voice was soft. What binds you, my human advisor? The question stirred something deep in Ryland's chest, something he'd been trying to ignore for weeks. Before he could respond, yet another emergency transmission filled the room. The rebellion was spreading faster than anyone had predicted. The Children of Dawn had taken 3 more systems. The moment broken, Nyara straightened, resuming her royal bearing. Summon the War Council, she commanded. And Ryland, stay close. I suspect I will need your unique perspective more than ever in the days to come. As he hurried to carry out her orders, Ryland felt the weight of competing loyalties pressing down on him. The rebellion represented everything he had once fought for: freedom, self-determination, the right of all peoples to choose their own path. But watching Nyara grapple with these challenges, seeing her genuine desire to understand and adapt, he couldn't help wondering if there might be a better way forward than simple revolution. The coming days would test them all. And somewhere in the depths of space, the fires of rebellion continued to spread, threatening to consume everything in their path. Hearts and stars. The War Council chamber buzzed with tension as reports of new uprisings flooded in from across the Empire. Ryland stood in his customary place behind Nyara's chair, watching the holographic displays paint the galaxy in shades of crisis. Red markers indicated rebel-controlled systems, while blue showed those still loyal to the crown. The red was spreading at an alarming rate. "We must crush this rebellion immediately," Lord Vaxon declared, his upper hands gesturing emphatically. "Show them the price of defiance. Make an example of Nexus Prime. By slaughtering our own people." Nyara's voice cut through the chamber like a blade. "Is that how you suggest we demonstrate the benefits of imperial rule? They are no longer our people, Your Majesty. They are traitors who must be." "Careful, Lord Vaxon." Nyara's silver eyes fixed on the noble. "Your enthusiasm for blood borders on suspicious. One might almost think you wish to provoke further violence." The council chamber fell silent. Ryland noticed several nobles exchanging glances. The pieces were falling into place. Vaxon's secret meetings, the suspicious timing of the rebellions, the way certain noble houses seemed prepared for the chaos. "Your Majesty," Vaxon started, but Nyara raised a hand for silence. "Leave us," she commanded. "All of you. Except you, Ryland Nash. You will stay." The council members filed out, some throwing curious glances at the human who had become the Queen's most trusted advisor. When they were alone, Nyara's formal posture softened slightly. "Tell me what you see," she said quietly. Ryland moved to the holographic display, studying the pattern of rebellions. "The uprising isn't random. These systems," he highlighted several red markers, "all have something in common. They're controlled by houses allied with Vaxon. The same houses that have been stockpiling weapons and ships for the past year. A coup attempt, wrapped in the flag of rebellion." Nyara's voice held a mixture of anger and sadness. "They seek to use the chaos to seize power for themselves." "Yes, but they've miscalculated." Ryland turned to face her. "The anger in the colonies is real. The desire for freedom isn't something they can control. It will consume them just as surely as it threatens your rule." Nyara rose, moving to stand beside him at the display. Her presence sent a familiar warmth through his body, one he had stopped trying to deny. "What would you have me do?" "Something unprecedented." He met her gaze steadily. "Give them what they want, but on your terms, not theirs." "You suggest I surrender my empire." There was no anger in her voice, only curiosity. "I suggest you transform it. Offer the colonies genuine autonomy. Create a confederation of free worlds, united by choice rather than force. Keep your role as a coordinator, a mediator, but let each world govern itself." The noble houses would never accept such a radical change. "Some of them are already plotting against you," Ryland pointed out. "Why not take this opportunity to break their power completely? Give their holdings to the people they've exploited. Show the galaxy that you're different from the emperors who came before you." Nyara studied him for a long moment, the patterns beneath her skin shifting with emotion. "Your words are treasonous. By all rights, I should have you executed for even suggesting such things. But you won't." He stepped closer, close enough to catch the exotic scent of her. "Because you know I'm right. Because you've seen the truth of it yourself. Have you enchanted me, Ryland Nash?" Her voice was barely a whisper. "Sometimes I wonder if you're some spirit sent to challenge everything I thought I knew. I'm just a man." He reached out, daring to touch her face. Her skin was cool and smooth beneath his fingers. "A man who has come to care for you far more than he should." The admission hung between them, dangerous and electric. For a moment, neither moved. Then Nyara's upper hands came up to cover his, while her lower ones gripped his waist, pulling him closer. "This is impossible," she breathed against his lips. "A queen and a slave. An Astrali and a human." "Everything about us is impossible," he replied. "And yet here we are." Their lips met in a kiss that sent shockwaves through Ryland's body. Her touch was like lightning, like starfire, like nothing he had ever experienced. He lost himself in the sensation, in the taste of her, in the feel of her 4 arms holding him close. A distant explosion shattered the moment. They broke apart as alarms began blaring throughout the palace. The holographic display flickered with new emergency signals. "My queen." A guard burst into the chamber. "The palace is under attack." Vaxen's forces have. A blast of energy caught the guard in the back. He crumpled, revealing armed figures in the doorway. Lord Vaxen stepped over the fallen guard, weapon raised. "I'm afraid your reign is at an end, Your Majesty." His upper hands held blasters while his lower ones operated a shield generator. "The old ways are finished. The Empire requires stronger leadership." Ryland moved to shield Nyara, but she stepped forward instead, her bearing regal despite the danger. "You fool," she said softly. "You think to take my throne through violence. You understand nothing of true leadership. I understand that your weakness would destroy everything we've built." Vaxen's eyes narrowed. "Starting with your unnatural affection for this human slave." He fired. Time seemed to slow as the energy blast cut through the air. Ryland dove for Nyara, knowing he wouldn't reach her in time. But the queen was already moving, her reactions faster than any human's. She dodged the blast with liquid grace, her own weapon appearing in her lower hands as her upper ones made complex gestures in the air. The chamber's defense systems activated, force fields springing up between them and their attackers. But Ryland could hear fighting throughout the palace. The coup had begun, and with it, the future of the Empire hung in the balance. "Come," Nyara commanded, grabbing his hand. "We have a revolution to lead." As they raced through secret passages in the palace walls, Ryland realized that everything had changed. He was no longer simply a slave, or a resistance fighter, or even an advisor. He had become something else entirely, a partner to an alien queen who might just reshape the galaxy, if they survived the night. Dawn of Unity. The palace's secret passages twisted like arteries through its living walls, pulsing with emergency lights. Ryland and Nyara moved swiftly through the network of hidden corridors, the sounds of fighting echoing distantly around them. Her lower hand gripped his while her upper ones held weapons ready. "The Royal Command Center," she explained as they ran. "If we can reach it, we can contact forces loyal to the crown and broadcast the truth to all worlds. The truth about Vaxen's coup. The truth about everything." Her silver eyes glanced back at him, about what the Empire must become if it's to survive. They emerged into a vast chamber deep within the palace's heart. Crystalline control panels lined the walls, their surfaces alive with flowing data. But they weren't alone. "I'm afraid I can't let you do that, Your Majesty." Lord Vaxen stepped from the shadows, flanked by armed guards. More of his forces filed in behind Ryland and Nyara, cutting off their escape. "The Empire requires order, strength, not your dangerous ideas of freedom." "My dangerous ideas." Nyara's voice was calm, but Ryland could see the combat patterns beginning to flow beneath her skin, an Astrali's equivalent of adrenaline. "You speak of order while bringing chaos, of strength while betraying your oaths. I speak of necessity." Vaxen's upper hands spread wide while his lower ones kept weapons trained on them. "Look what your soft rule has brought us. Rebellion in the colonies. Humans treated as equals. Ancient traditions cast aside. Ancient traditions of oppression and control." Ryland cut in. "How many worlds must suffer to maintain your power?" "Silence, slave," Vaxen snarled. "Your influence ends here. Kill them both." Everything happened at once. Nyara moved with liquid grace, her 4 arms becoming a blur as she engaged multiple attackers. Ryland dove for cover behind a control panel, grabbing a fallen weapon. The air filled with energy blasts and the clash of ceremonial blades. Through the chaos, Rylan caught glimpses of Mayra fighting. She was magnificent, her combat style a deadly dance that used all four arms to devastating effect. But there were too many opponents. They couldn't hold out forever. Then he saw it, a pattern in the flowing data on the control panels. His time in the palace hadn't been wasted. He'd learned to read the Astralis systems, to understand their bioorganic technology. "Nara," he shouted, "the emergency protocols." Like we discussed, her silver eyes met his across the chamber. In that moment, perfect understanding passed between them. She nodded once, then raised her voice in command. "By royal authority, initiate Protocol Sunrise." Rylan's hands flew across the nearest control panel, inputting the codes they'd prepared in secret. Throughout the palace, throughout the Empire, every communication channel opened at once. Every screen, every holographic display, every neural feed lit up with the same transmission. Nyara's voice rang out, clear and strong, reaching every corner of her domain. "People of the Empire, hear me. For too long we have clung to old ways, to systems of control and dominance that serve only the few. Today, that changes." Vaxon's forces hesitated, weapons still raised but unsure. The Queen continued, her words carrying the weight of history. "I declare an end to the old empire. In its place, I propose a union of free worlds. Each planet, each people, shall govern themselves. The Astrali throne will serve not as ruler, but as mediator, coordinator, protector of the peace we forge together." "You can't do this." Vaxon's voice shook with rage. "The noble houses will never accept. The noble houses no longer have a choice." Rylan stood, weapon lowered. "Look." The data displays showed new information flooding in. Across the Empire, colonial forces were turning against their noble overlords. The common people, inspired by Nara's words, were rising up, not in rebellion against the crown, but in support of her vision. "You see, Vaxon," Nyara's smile held triumph and sadness both. "You thought to use the people's desire for freedom against me. Instead, it becomes the foundation of a new order, one that serves all, not just the privileged few." Palace security forces burst into the chamber, forces loyal to the crown. Vaxon and his conspirators found themselves surrounded, their coup crumbling around them. "Take them to detention," Nyara commanded. "They will stand trial before representatives of all worlds, not just their noble peers." As the rebels were led away, Rylan moved to Nyara's side. "It won't be easy," he warned. "Change never is. Some will resist. Then we will face it together." She turned to him, her four arms wrapping around him in an embrace that felt like coming home. "My human advisor. My love. My partner in building something new among the stars." "Partner." He raised an eyebrow. "Not slave. Never again." Her cool lips found his. "From this day forward, no one in our realm shall wear chains. We will forge bonds of choice, of love, of shared purpose." Above them, the first light of dawn began to filter through the palace's crystalline spires. The revolution had come after all, but not in the way anyone had expected. Not in fire and blood, but in transformation and hope. Rylan held Nyara close, feeling the patterns of joy flowing beneath her skin. He had come to her court as a slave, a resistance fighter seeking to undermine an empire. Instead, he had found something far more precious, a chance to build a better future for all peoples. "Together, then," he whispered against her lips, "for whatever comes next." "Together," she agreed, "until the stars themselves grow dim." And in the dawn of that new day, as word of change spread across the galaxy, a human and an Astrali queen began writing the next chapter of their impossible story. It would not be an easy road, but they would walk it side by side, proving that love could bridge the void between worlds and light the way to tomorrow. The Empire was dead. The union of free worlds was born. And somewhere on Earth, A resistance fighter's dream of freedom had become something greater than he had ever imagined possible.